Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back. If you've been hearing a lot about new gun laws lately and feeling a little uncertain about what it all means for you and your family, you are not alone. The Supreme Court has just handed down a landmark decision that is already reshaping the gun laws across our country. For many of us who have lived through decades of change, news like this can feel overwhelming, even a little unsettling, and that is completely okay to feel. But here's what I want you to know. You deserve clear, honest answers, not confusing legal language, not fear, and certainly not panic. Together, we're going to walk through exactly what has changed, what it means in plain, everyday terms, and most importantly, how it may affect your rights and your peace of mind. Stay with me until the end. I promise to keep this simple, calm, and genuinely helpful. And if this feels like the kind of caring community you've been looking for, a little thumbs up on this video means the world and helps us reach more wonderful people just like you. So let's start right at the beginning, because this story really does go back a long way. And I think once you understand the history, everything that's happening right now is going to make so much more sense to you. The Second Amendment, which guarantees the right to keep and bear arms, has been part of our Constitution since 1791. That's over 200 years. And for most of that time, the courts interpreted it in a lot of different ways, in different states, with different rules. Some places were very strict about guns. Other places were wide open. And Americans just sort of lived with that patchwork of laws, state by state, county by county, sometimes city by city. But in 2022, and this is where the real momentum began, the Supreme Court made a decision in a case called New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. Now, don't let that long title intimidate you. What it essentially said was this: if the government wants to restrict a gun-related right, it has to point to a historical tradition of similar laws going all the way back to the founding era of this country. That was a huge shift. It changed the legal test that courts all across the country use when they're deciding whether a gun law is constitutional or not. And now, the Supreme Court has gone even further. The most recent decision builds on Bruin in a way that legal experts are calling the most significant reshaping of American gun law in decades. So what exactly did they say? Let's talk about that, because this is where it gets really important for you personally. What the court actually decided: at the heart of this new decision is a question that sounds simple, but has enormous consequences. Who gets to decide which people can or cannot own a firearm? For years, federal law, specifically a law called the Gun Control Act, had a list of categories of people who were prohibited from owning guns: convicted felons, people with certain mental health histories, people under domestic violence restraining orders, and so on. The lower courts had been applying these restrictions in a fairly straightforward way. If you fit one of these categories, you cannot legally possess a firearm, period. But after the Bruin decision set that new historical tradition test, defense attorneys started challenging those restrictions left and right. Their argument was essentially, show me a law from 1791, or close to it, that did the same thing. And in some cases, the courts were struggling to find that historical parallel, which led to a series of rulings, some of them frankly baffling to a lot of everyday people, that seemed to say certain categories of people couldn't be disarmed under current constitutional standards. The Supreme Court's new ruling tries to bring order to all of that chaos. It affirmed that Congress and the states do have the authority to disarm people who are, in the court's language, dangerous, even if the exact historical parallel isn't a perfect match. The justices said you don't need a carbon copy of an 1800s law. You need a tradition of the same principle. And the principle that dangerous people can be disarmed has been part of American law since the very beginning, even if the specific categories looked different back then. What this means for you at home. Now, I want to pause here and speak directly to you, my friend, because I know what's probably going through your mind right now. You're thinking, okay, but what does any of this actually mean for me? Does this affect my gun? Does this affect my rights? Do I need to do something differently? And those are completely fair questions. Let me address them one by one, because you deserve real answers, not vague reassurances. If you are a law-abiding gun owner, and the vast majority of you watching this are exactly that, this ruling does not take anything away from you. Your right to own a firearm for self-defense in your home, which the Supreme Court established back in the 2008 Heller decision, remains fully intact. That hasn't changed. What has changed is how courts across the country will now evaluate challenges to specific gun regulations. It's more of a legal framework shift than a direct change to what you personally can or cannot do. Think of it like this. Imagine the rules of the road have been updated. Not the lanes, not the speed limits on your street, but the way traffic courts handle disputes. Your daily drive is the same. But the judges reviewing those disputes now have clearer guidelines to follow. That's roughly the kind of shift we're talking about here. That said, and this is important, specific state laws are absolutely being affected. In the months and years following the Bruin decision, courts struck down or put on hold gun laws in California, New York, Illinois, and several other states. Some of those involved restrictions on carrying guns in public places. Some involved what are called assault weapon bans. Some involved magazine capacity limits. The full ripple effect of this new ruling on those ongoing legal battles is still unfolding, and it will take time, possibly years, for all of it to fully shake out in the courts. And hey, real quick, right here in the middle of all this important information, if you are finding this helpful, if this is the kind of clear and caring breakdown you've been looking for, would you do me a small favor and tap that like button right now? It takes just 1 second. It costs you nothing, and it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need this kind of information. I appreciate you so much for that. Now, let's keep going, because we're just getting to the good stuff. The domestic violence piece, and why it matters. One of the most talked about aspects of this whole legal battle has been the question of domestic violence restraining orders. This one really struck a chord with a lot of people across the political spectrum because it touches on something deeply human, the safety of families, of women, of children in vulnerable situations. A few years ago, a lower court in Texas ruled that a federal law prohibiting people under domestic violence restraining orders from owning guns was unconstitutional under the new Bruin test. The reasoning was that there was no precise historical analog from the founding era. And when that ruling came out, I'll be honest with you, a lot of people were horrified. Advocacy groups, law enforcement organizations, domestic violence shelters, they all sounded the alarm loudly. The Supreme Court, in a case called United States versus Rahimi, pushed back on that lower court ruling and said, no, the historical tradition of disarming dangerous individuals is real and well established, and someone who is under a restraining order because a court has determined they pose a threat to another person absolutely can be prohibited from possessing firearms. That was an 8-1 decision, which in today's Supreme Court is about as close to unanimous as you're ever going to see. And that ruling stands as a foundation for the current moment. Why does this matter to you, even if domestic violence isn't something you're personally dealing with? Because it tells you something important about how this court is thinking. They are not trying to make the country a more dangerous place. They are genuinely grappling with how to balance a constitutional right against the real-world safety needs of communities. And understanding that helps you cut through the noise when you hear extreme claims on either side of this debate. The political noise versus what's real? Speaking of noise, I have to say this because I think it's something you need to hear. If you turn on the television or scroll through social media right now, you are going to see a lot of very dramatic, very scary-sounding headlines about this ruling. Some will say the Supreme Court has made America a lawless Wild West. Others will say the court has betrayed the Second Amendment and is coming for your guns. And I want you to take a breath and remember something very important. Neither of those things is true. The truth, as it almost always is, lives somewhere in the middle. This ruling is significant. It will have real consequences for specific laws in specific states. Lawyers and legislators are going to be very busy for a long time sorting through the implications. But for the average American going about their daily life, the most dramatic predictions you're hearing are not an accurate picture of what's actually happening on the ground. And here's the thing about being in our generation. And I say our because I feel like we're in this together. We've lived through a lot of big moments in this country. We've seen headlines that made it sound like the world was ending. And then we've watched life keep moving forward. We know how to read between the lines. We know that context matters. And the context here is that this is a legal system working through genuinely hard constitutional questions, not a single dramatic moment that changes everything overnight. What I'd encourage you to do is pay attention to your own state's specific laws, because that's where the rubber meets the road for you personally. Your state's attorney general, your local law enforcement, those are the voices worth listening to for guidance on what, if anything, has actually changed in your community. Practical steps you can take right now. Now, I don't ever want to leave you without something you can actually do with the information we've talked about. So let's get practical for a moment, because that's what we do here. We don't just talk about things, we figure out how they apply to real life. First, and most importantly, if you are a gun owner, take a few minutes in the coming weeks to look up the current laws in your state regarding storage, carrying, and registration. Some state laws have been in legal flux, and what was true a year ago may have been updated. A quick visit to your state's official government website, or even a brief conversation with a local attorney who handles firearms matters, can give you total peace of mind. Knowledge really is power here. Second, if you have family members, maybe adult children or grandchildren, who own firearms, this is a wonderful opportunity to start a calm, loving conversation about safe storage and responsible ownership. Not a lecture, not a debate, just a conversation rooted in care. Because one of the things that truly keeps communities safe isn't any single law. It's families that talk to each other and look out for one another. Third, stay curious and stay skeptical of sensational headlines. Bookmark a couple of trustworthy news sources, outlets that actually read the court decisions and explain them clearly without a political agenda screaming at you from both margins. Organizations like SCOTUS Blog do an incredible job of explaining exactly what the Supreme Court ruled, in language real people can understand. I'll mention that because it's genuinely useful, and useful is what we're all about here. And fourth, and this one is close to my heart, keep talking to people around you about how they're feeling. Community is everything. If your neighbor is confused about what's happening, share what you've learned. If someone at your church or your senior center is anxious about all the news, sit with them for a few minutes and help them see the bigger picture. That's the kind of ripple effect that no law can create. Only people can. The bigger picture. Democracy in motion. I want to zoom out one more time before we wrap up, because I think there's something genuinely beautiful in what's happening here, even if the noise around it makes it hard to see. This country has been debating the meaning of the Second Amendment for over 2 centuries. Smart people, good faith people, people who love this country just as much as you and I do, have disagreed, sometimes passionately, about where the lines should be drawn. And that disagreement, that ongoing national conversation, is not a bug in our system. It is the system, working exactly as it was designed to. The Supreme Court is not the final word on what kind of country we want to be. That's up to all of us, through the people we elect, the conversations we have, and the communities we build. Courts interpret the Constitution, but we, the people, continue to shape what it means to live in a free and safe society. And that is a responsibility we carry together, across every generation. You are not powerless in this moment. You are informed. You are engaged. And the fact that you are here, taking your time to actually understand what's happening instead of just reacting to a headline, tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are. You care. You pay attention. And this world is genuinely better because of people like you. So don't let anyone make you feel like this moment is too complicated for you to understand, or that your voice doesn't matter in this conversation. It absolutely does. Stay informed, stay grounded, and most of all, stay connected to the people and the community around you. Because at the end of the day, that's what keeps all of us safe, more than any law ever could.